Hello, and we are on to chapter 3, which is all about the brain and neurons, main ways we communicate. As previously, I posted the slides, Google Slides, so you can always take a look at those. Those are posted in the module. I'm first going to talk about the brain. And when we think about the brain, we can divide it into three main areas. So you have the hindbrain, which is more of our basic states keeping us alive. It's kind of the same functioning you would think of a reptile. So I've got a picture of that lizard there. Our next section, which is in the interior of our brain, is the midbrain. The midbrain is part of our limbic system. It's connected. A lot of mammalian species have these same processings with emotions, being aware of situations that could be stressful. So we're going to talk a little bit about fight or flight. And then our last section is our forebrain, which when we think about the brain, we think about this area. We can also call it the cerebellum. We can also call it the cerebral cortex. And so this is kind of the highest order. So we've got these three categories. Lowest order, our hindbrain, a lot of functioning back here, our interior, the limbic system, the midbrain, and then our forebrain. So how did we start learning about the brain? I've got a couple of videos that show you about EEG and fMRIs that you can check out in the module. But I wanted to share a brief story of Phineas Gage. He was one of our first cases where we started to better understand the complexities of the brain and start thinking about function with structure. So Phineas Gage, back in the day, so you can pause and read through this. This is the actual news article, but on September 13th, 1848, he was involved in a railway accident. So he had a iron instrument go through his head, and he didn't die. But there were some changes that had happened. And so here is, again, looking at some MRI functioning, recreation of this. You can kind of see where it went through his skull. So it went through. He did lose his eye in this. And so what happened? People were really curious what's going on with Phineas Gage. So again, here is the actual physician's report, but you can bottle that down to he lost control of his social emotions and he was unable to plan. So if you look back at this, again, we're going to talk more about different areas of the brain with structure and function. You can see that this forebrain, this frontal cortex area here was damaged, and that we know is involved in planning, and it also is involved in having us keep our cool in situations. We'll talk briefly about that. So again, I've got some videos, again, talking about more about how we learn about structure and function with the brain. So we've got the EEG, shower cap, giving you a bunch of measures. So this guy right here is showing you a bunch of the feedback you get on each one of those nodes. Again, I've got a video of that in the module, and then fMRI as well. So we're going to start learning about basic structures of the brain. So our forebrain, which we can also call a cerebrum, so think of it like drum is larger, cerebrum. And we could also call this the cerebral cortex. So we've got these main areas of our brain, and we can divide them into 4 lobes. Your first lobe is frontal, so I connected a lot of visuals here. Visuals connect with something we call dual processing. If you're able to connect a visual as well as kind of information about that, those words, it helps better bind those memories, bind that information. So frontal lobe, thinking, planning, our executive function is part of our frontal lobe, right? You then have the area near your ears, the temporal lobe. So I like to think of timpani as a drum. I can hear the timpani through my drum. Occipital is the back of the brain with our visual system. So although our eyes are in the front, the information gets relayed to the back of our brain. And then the parietal is connected with us coordinating motions and movements. And then you notice these pink and blue areas. I'm going to talk about those next. So again, those are the 4 lobes of our brain. So those pink and blue areas that are connecting our parietal and our frontal lobe are connected to our motor neurons and sensory information. And so one helps us move our hands, and then the other one is connected very similar to that same area, and it's connected to the feelings in my hands. We'll talk about that when we talk about neural communication. This slide kind of shows you there's different real estate, so to speak, so with those areas of the brain. So you can see these bigger, we've got a whole lot more sensitivity in our hands and functioning. So if you think about playing a violin, or we use a lot of our fine motor skills, and you can see our head is more sensitive as well. Some other parts of the brain that are connected to these different lobes I want to talk about are connected with aphasia. So there's different types of aphasia, but basically aphasia is when you have issues with communication. You either might have something like a verbal salad, where I'm talking and it doesn't make a lot of sense. If you knew the English language, you would be like, what is she saying? And then we also have another type of aphasia, expressive aphasia, where I know what I want to say, but it just will not come out motor-wise. And we know we've got two areas of the brain that are connected to language that can be impacted, and when they're impacted from things like strokes, we might have these expressions of different types of aphasia. So Broca's area and Wernicke's area we know are connected with language processing. If we have damage to these, that individual could have some type of aphasia. We also know, we're going to move on now to the part of the midbrain, which we can also call the limbic system. This is the interior of the brain. So if this was the brain, my midbrain would be in here, and then this would be my forebrain, my cerebellum, or I can also call that my cerebral cortex, and then this part would be my frontal, and I've got my temporal on the side, and then the upper side is parietal, and back is occipital. Our midbrain, again, is connected more of the mammalian system, and we've got four different areas up there. So we have the amygdala, which is kind of like an almond and connected with our emotions. We've got the thalamus, we've got the hypothalamus, and we've got the hippocampus. So all of these different areas, again, trying to connect with dual processing. I've got the visuals. The hypothalamus connects. Am I thirsty? Am I hungry? Am I cold? What are my needs? And when I realize that I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, I'm cold, I'm connected with the hypothalamus. The thalamus I have as a doctor. It's kind of the director. I'm going to talk more about the role of the thalamus in a minute. The amygdala is connected to emotions, so you can see that angry person. We also see an area, we've got a number of different areas connected with memory, but we've got memory in the hippocampus. And so that explains one reason why we might have stronger memories for more emotional events. So if it's too emotional, that could get into trauma, and that can impact our processing of events and memories. So another thing that I want to connect with this idea of the thalamus is sometimes our midbrain, and you can think about it from an evolutionary perspective, our midbrain came before our forebrain. When I get really upset, you might have heard the expression flip your lid. And that's the case where when we get so angry, so emotional, our amygdala fires off. It tells the thalamus, I need the floor. And essentially, we say we flip our lid because we lose control of our rationalization and our planning and our thinking and controlling of our emotions from the frontal cortex. So some interesting things and there's different things we can do to help us control our emotions. So our limbic system, some ways to remember that. I have this little expression I usually work out with students when we're face-to-face, but I knew it was lunchtime. So again, connecting hypothalamus, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm cold, kind of those physiological reactions of needs I might have. And then my hippocampus helped me remember. Again, hippocampus connected to memory that I opened. There was a new restaurant that opened on campus, again, connecting more to the hippocampus. But when I got there, I waited in line, and that made my amygdala react with anger. So again, amygdala, anger, amygdala, emotion. So that's our midbrain. Our last part, our hindbrain, the different functions of the hindbrain that keep us alive. So again, I've got some different visuals. You can't see the reticular formation, but that's another area of kind of more primitive attention for us. So I've got someone, if you look at the slides, like driving. Cerebellum, bell, is a smaller, so we have the cerebrum, larger cortex. And then the cerebellum is connected with emotions, again, motor skills, think more primitive, again, reptilian. Pons is connected with our sleeping and our dreaming. It's also connected with right brain, left brain. And then our medulla is the part of our brain, which is our brain connected with our brain stem right here, and it keeps us alive. It helps us with regulation. Very, very, very important part of our brain. All right, so I encourage you to pause this and see if you can write down as many parts of the brain as I just discussed. Again, these are different key areas of the brain. And then I challenge you to pick one of these scenarios, Chandra, Melanie, or James, and see if you can connect as many function and structure according to the different scenarios. And again, I will throw out some extra credit. You've got 2 points. You can message me by Sunday night. Again, connecting as many different parts of the brain. So again, think about, you could say occipital, anything that has connected to the visuals. Everybody is using the medulla and breathing and keeping themselves alive, even though that's not written. So be as thorough as possible for that. All right, so again, some quick review. You've got your 4 major lobes as part of your forebrain, which we can also call the cerebellum, which we can also call the cerebral cortex. You have your cerebellum. Again, drum is the larger area, bell is connected with those movements, and then part of that medulla is connected with our brainstem. Keeps us alive. So we do have those 4 lobes. Those 4 lobes are connected to 2 different hemispheres. So each part of our brain we have is we've got 2 different hemispheres, our left hemisphere and our right hemisphere. Each one has those 4 lobes. They also have the primary and somatosensory cortexes, those pink and blue stripe areas. And it's all connected by this fibers through the corpus callosum. So we do have different functionings depending on if you're we have certain properties for our left hemisphere and certain properties for our right hemisphere. So we do see each hemisphere controls the opposite side of the body. So my left side is controlled by my right hemisphere, and my right side is controlled by my left hemisphere. We also think of left hemisphere as language. A lot of our language processing occurs in our left hemisphere. We also see math, numerical skills, reasoning, logic, all of those are on the left. So language, logic, left. On the right hemisphere, we see processing, again, your left side of the body. You also see processing in emotional thinking, music, visual, spatial relations. So you can kind of think of the right hemisphere as the more creative side. Again, we use both sides of our hemisphere. We tend to have individuals who are more left hemisphere dominant. So think about if you're right-handed versus left-handed. If you're right-handed, you're going to be using a lot more of those motor skills on your left-hand side. Again, language, logic, all left-hand side. Sometimes, for whatever reason, we have to sever the corpus callosum. And so what happens with individuals when that happens? So when you cut or sever a corpus callosum, again, it's done in extreme situations. Sometimes, most often it's done to control with seizures that are happening. We no longer have that communication. So the corpus callosum is our source of communication. And so I want you to go ahead and watch this quick 5-minute video of this individual who has no corpus callosum. And I want you to identify what is going on. All right, so please pause. And then again, you can get to the link from the Google Slides and you're going to watch this video. And then after you watch this video, I'm going to go ahead and explain what's happening. You're going to see that he is still able to get that communication, even though the corpus callosum is severed, but it's now being processed at an unconscious level. So we talked about levels of consciousness with Freud. He's still able to go through and process that information. And so you saw that in the video. Again, if something is on his right hemisphere, he then can connect with that. And again, it's done in that unconscious way. Versus if he sees something on the right-hand side, it is connected to his left hemisphere. And so he can use language for that. But when it's seen on The left side, the right hemisphere, you saw that he was able to draw. And when he drew with his left hand, he was able to connect with that. So interesting things that are going on there in again, our levels of processing. I'm going to spend the last couple of minutes now getting into the nitty gritty. So I started kind of the big picture looking at function. Now we're going to dive in and talk more about those communicators, those neurons. So again, this slide kind of gives you a general overview. We've talked about different areas of the brain. Each area of the brain is going to connect and have its own neural pathways. And then we're going to have different types of neurons, and we're going to have each one kind of having its own functioning. We're going to connect more with that when we talk about neurotransmitters. When we talk about neurons in the nervous system, you have your central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord. And then you have your peripheral nervous system, which kind of connects everything else. With our peripheral nervous system, we have the autonomic system. So that's automatic, things you don't think about that happen. Connected to that is the parasympathetic and the sympathetic system. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And then we have in the peripheral, things we can control. Things I'm able to do if I want to dance, if I want to move my hands, etc. That's part of that somatic or skeletal systems. So when we're thinking about those different things, again, we've got different types of neurons. When we're connected with our central nervous system, we need to have a pathway that's going to send a message. So I'm going to use the example of I touch my hand on a flame or a candle and I realize it's hot. I need my brain to message from my sensory that was hot, and then I need my motor skills to move my hand away, and it's done very quickly. So that connects with the afferent and efferent nerves. And then again, peripheral nervous system, our autonomic system, which is more automatic, can be divided into two different functions that are actually connected to fight or flight, which is part of that midbrain or the limbic system. So we have the somatic and the parasympathetic. Sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So I'm going to talk more about that. So our two different systems, our sympathetic is when we are stressed, our body is going to change physiologically to the stress. Once that stress is over, our body has another system, the parasympathetic system, to calm us down. So think of a parachute kind of being more calming. So we need both these systems. We need, when we're in a stress mode, we need our body's going to make those adjustments. So our pupils are going to dilate. My stomach is going to kind of hold off on the digestion and increase that blood flow and energy to my lungs if I need to run for my life. And so I'll have some changes. And then I'm going to see a lot of tightening of other muscles. And then once I'm relaxed, that stress has passed me, my body has a system to have that go through. And that's the parasympathetic system, the parachute. Right? So now I'm going to get the blood flow back to my digestive system, other areas of my body. My pupils will contract, right? So again, our stress responses, and we're talking more about stress in the coming weeks. Again, I already talked about two different neurons, the afferent, which is sensory, saying, hey, going to that muscle, going to that arm, saying it's hot. And then my efferent is my motor moving away, saying, move that hand. And then we also have different types of neurons that are connected between those things. I'm going to also talk about different functions of the neurons. So we've got different parts of the neurons. And I'm going to show you a graph of this, but this kind of lays out the general physiological components. When we think about an axon, I like to think about my hand as an analogy. All right, so we have our cell body, which is the palm of my hand, right? So this we can also call a soma. I have my dendrites. My dendrites are my fingers, right? They're going to be receiving messages from other neurons, and they're going to be receiving them from terminal buttons. So if I had like something dangling from my elbow, that might be a terminal button. And it's going to then release neurotransmitters, and then those are the chemical messages that are going to tell my neuron what I need to be doing, what message is being carried and communicated. All right, so then I get a message through my dendrite, my fingers. It gets to the soma, the cell body, and it sends a message. Do I need to stop? Do I need to go? Is it excitatory or inhibitory? And then it's going to keep going, right? If I had a sleeve or a sock in my arm, that insulator would be the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is an insulator. It's connected to omega-3s, and getting enough of our omega-3s, fatty acids help with that. So people with poor nutrition might not have enough myelin, which is going to affect their cognitive development, their functioning, their thinking, their brain's neural development. And then I have at the very end the terminal buttons. So let me show you a picture of that instead of the picture of my hand. So again, cell body, dendrites, right? And then you've got your axon. Again, that layering of that orange is that myelin sheath, which helps. If I have myelin sheath, it helps insulate and it helps transmit that message better. Then I'm going to have it relay, and then the ends of those are my terminal buttons, which release my neurotransmitters, which then go through to the dendrites, which then carry on the message of what's going on. I'm not going to go into the physiology of how neurons are activated, but it is based on this idea of action potential for go, no go, for different types of messaging. And if you're curious, you can read more about that in the book, or if you've taken anatomy and physiology, you probably can share more a little about that with your peers. So again, looking more directly at the terminal buttons, just so you can see. So again, taking those little nodes at those ends, you can kind of see that's how messages are relayed. And then again, that electrical impulse releases that chemical signal, and then the action potential is kind of a go or no go. For neurons, we have two different things. Excitatory is go, 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 keep things going, keep things going. And then inhibitory is saying, okay, we've got it, things are good, stop, stop, stop. All right, so those are the two main functions. We have, as I said before, different types of neurotransmitters. Those neurotransmitters have their own pathways, they have their own functioning. I'm not going to test you on any specific neurotransmitters, but it's really important to know. It's exciting stuff to think about. So this table gives you some general things, and I also have a couple of slides in the next slides that kind of review it if you have interest in these. With a lot of these, we might see there's drugs that kind of help regulate neurotransmitter issues. So serotonin, for example, we know affects hunger, mood, sleep, arousal. If I don't have enough serotonin, might exhibit symptoms of depression. I then might be given an antidepressant like Prozac that would help increase my serotonin levels so that I am better regulated in terms of mood, hunger, sleep, arousal, right? So again, each one of these neurotransmitters, and there's way more than this, can go through and have their own functions. And then, so I have that column in the table of functions. This is what it does when it's regulating correctly. And then malfunctions, this is what we know happens that's connected. So again, you can review the Google Slides. I've got a couple more of these with our different neurotransmitters. One of my favorites that wasn't shared in the original table is oxytocin. Oxytocin is kind of our social, emotional neurotransmitter that helps us with bonds and attachment and building relationships. So when you have that special bond or relationship with another individual, you release oxytocin, and that's good for us. And that is another thing we're going to connect more when we talk about stress. Social support. Oxytocin is a great help when we're feeling stressed to kind of fight off stress with that idea of social support. I've got last two slides are just basic terms. If you're trying to hone in more of those terms, again, within the modules, you'll also see that I have a what to know for the exam box as well that you can help pay attention as you're watching the videos and going through the material. So I hope you have a great week, and thanks for watching.